Hi, it's Garbo. This week's video will be a fun one, I hope, especially if you're interested in dancing. I knew I had some pretty cool stuff in a particular box that might fit well with Black History Month because it was related to Wilmetta Teeny Stockton, who was Kay Kemble's life partner. But you know how it is when you go looking for that one thing and you end up with something better? I was looking for a scrapbook, and what I came across was a film canister. I thought, hey, what's this? And unfortunately, the piece of masking tape that had been stuck to the canister to tell what it was immediately fell off, aggravating because it fell down in the box with all of the other stuff. I hoped when I took the lid off of the canister that the film itself might be marked, but it wasn't. So I thought, okay, I gotta find that piece of tape. So I dug everything out of the box and piled it up next to me on the sofa and on the floor next to the sofa. I didn't have to go all the way to the bottom of the box, but I found a piece of masking tape. Masking tape, especially the old kind, it has kind of like diagonal lines going through it, and somebody a long time ago used an old school ballpoint pen, so it was a little hard to read. But I figured out that it was a film reel that featured Cab Calloway. You know, the guy who did Minnie the Moocher and Heidi Ho and all that stuff. Dancing guy, band leader. So that would have been cool anyway. But as soon as I saw this piece of tape with the name of the film reel on it, I thought, aha! Because I have a typescript of a 1980 interview done with Kay, and it mentions Teeny being a collector of 35mm movies. Not home movies like that are 8mm or 16mm, but actual large ones that were used in movie theaters. Teeny was particular with her collecting. She collected what they used to call film shorts or movie shorts. She liked the old cartoons, Felix the Cat and other ones. But she also bought musical short films when she found them at estate sales or when movie theaters were being renovated or being torn down. She also traded duplicates with other collectors to expand her collection. If you are not familiar with how I came across all this stuff about Kay's life, you can see earlier videos on this channel and they give you more of the backstory. I would say I might have 7 or 8 of these film reels. This one, Cab Calloway's Jitterbug Party, was a great find. It is a compilation thing. It has 4 or 5 scenes. The idea would be that they would film a stage with an orchestra on it and then people seated in the audience, or sometimes they were doing a charity event or a contest or something like that. That was always the reason why people were dancing and singing with just introductions. There were lots and lots of the musical ones. It was a great way to do promotion, right? This particular reel of film that's in the box is much too brittle to try to play it, even if I had a large theater-sized projector, as Teeny must have had. The films go to pieces if they're not stored correctly, and this one is 90 years old, and I'm sure it was upstairs in some former theater where there was no air conditioning before it spent who knows how long in a New Orleans storage unit. But I don't need to pretend I'm in the AV club at school and try to thread the reel onto a projector, because we have YouTube. I've put a still here, which is the people who are shoulder to shoulder and have their arms around each other because they're doing a dance, a group dance at a party. And as you can see, it's a colorized version of the film, which is probably not what's on this film reel, but it was the best looking film I could find on YouTube. The reason why it's important, especially during Black History Month, is that this film, Jitterbug Party, was really influential in showing people how dances were done, traditional black dances were done. There were some clubs that had mixed audiences where the races mixed together, but a lot of places it was not allowed by local ordinances. So whites couldn't go into black clubs, blacks couldn't go into white clubs. The film really helped people see all the variations, you know, when people say they're going to do the Lindy Hop, for instance, or jive, or swing, there are so many dance steps that they incorporate into those. And if you go on YouTube, as I did, to look at dance instructors explaining how to do the steps of these different old dances, well, I'm telling you, if you watch 20 videos, you will see 18 different versions. Maybe 2 people do it exactly the same way, and everybody else has their own variation or their own take on it. If you're new to this channel, I want to let you know that sometimes how I do these videos is I explain a bit as myself, and then I take on the role of speaking as Kay. One of the things that is challenging about this project is that because all of the materials were stored in less than ideal circumstances, things like cassette tapes are very distorted. So I do hear her voice on some old tapes, but they are very wobbly because they got overheated. Anytime I came across either a reel-to-reel tape, which I have a machine for, and of course cassette tapes, as soon as I realized there were those kind of materials in the boxes, I tried to get them out. And then they all just need to be interpreted by me. Wing, you know, wow, wow, wow kind of thing, and it fades away. And sometimes the tape flipped over, like the shiny side gets twisted in the box, and then it gets like a disrupted place in it. So what has worked the best for me with the interview tapes is that I just listen to them transcribed, and then I speak as Kay when I'm doing these videos. Now, this particular one, I have most of the typescript, which is great because then I didn't have to sit down and transcribe the whole thing. I don't know if it was the person who did the interview with Kay, or if it was Kay or Teeny or a family member who typed up what they heard on the tape. A lot of young women were interested in what Kay was doing in World War II as a band leader. The young feminist academics and so on were interested in interviewing her, both formally for colleges, but also like in zines of the 1970s and 1980s. That was a way where she was having a bit of a renaissance. She was playing music again as part of a nostalgia type swing dance night that would happen at a New Orleans nightclub. And this was early on because it was 1980, where people are just starting to be aware that Kay had ever done anything interesting. Today, as I record this and speak as Kay, I'll be reading from the transcript. The top sheet of this stapled transcript got rubbed against something, and I can't really read what's on page 1. So I'm picking up on page 2. Kay seems to be listing the styles of dance that she knew how to do, and a lot of it was changed because of her forming a relationship with Teeny Stockton. It's one of the first times that I've heard a little bit of the story of how the two of them went from being bandmates or collaborators in the band that Kay was the band leader for, and for which Teeny played the saxophone. Okay, so I will end the introduction part right here, and then resume this speaking as Kay, reading from this transcript. Well, all I had for dancing when I was a girl were mostly square dances. You know, I lived in this little farmhouse back before St. Louis got built up so much, and we were south and east of St. Louis, in a little Illinois town. It wasn't even a town. Really, there were a number of people there that were religious in a different way. We belonged to a small, special kind of church. Some of the people around us belonged to churches where they did not think that dancing was appropriate. The only kind of dancing that was really all right with people would be group dances, mostly square dances and things of that kind when I was a girl. When I went to teachers' college, the college would meet up with a men's technical college about 20 miles from us, and we would take turns going to each other's gymnasium. So they would have a fall formal, and we'd have a few dances around the holiday time and then in the spring and so on. So they would come to us and we would go to them 2 or 3 times in a year. I practiced with some of the other girls who were from more of a city environment where they would know more sophisticated kind of dancing. And there were 3 or 4 kinds of dances that people did. I never really knew what most of the names of them were. A lot of people were still doing the Charleston or something like the Charleston. It wasn't like the 1920s Charleston anymore. We're 10 years after that. 3 or 4 steps forward and 3 or 4 steps back and do the leg crosses. Not the bee's knees and all that stuff. People weren't doing that as much anymore. They would do the kicks and things like that. There was one thing that people would call falling off the log. You would be stepping forward and stepping back, and then you'd start to add to it. It's kind of hard to, I don't think there's room in here for me to get up and try to show it to you, but you'd step down, raise up your heel, slide the toe of the other shoe underneath that one, and then you'd substitute that foot for the other foot. That one would take the place of the other foot. And then you'd also bend your knee. When you got good doing that one, then that's where you'd put the fall off the log part, because once you learned how to switch out your feet like that, then you would do this wobbly thing. You would try to fall to the side a little bit and catch yourself like you were walking along a log behind somebody. Whoop, you caught your balance and then you come back. So that was one we would do. I remember the name of that one. They do a barrel house, and that was where you take and circle your whole leg around. I don't know how to describe it. Like a megaphone, around in a big circle. And it was harder for some of the gals to do it because you had your skirt on. The skirts then came down tighter around the legs, and so it would be harder. You'd have to kind of do it from your knee. The men would come and do it all the way up from their hip, but the gals would have to do kind of a modified one. There was another one that was called Applejack, and that was one that always confused me because I couldn't ever really tell exactly what you were supposed to do. I remember you stepped to one side and you would clap, and then you'd step to the other side and you'd clap, and I think you leaned. You'd kind of lean over and clap, and then you'd walk back the other way and clap. And I never really understood what I was supposed to be doing with that one. And all of those dances were pretty demure. We were having fun, and especially if it was us gals practicing together. The young men only came to see us every so often, and we would go to see them. Nobody thought it was funny at that time or strange in any way. We would get together and either dance on our own, or we would partner dance with each other in the gymnasium to practice to go to these co-ed dances later. Some of us who were music majors, maybe we had a little bit more of a sense of rhythm and trying to keep with it. I thought of myself as really one of the better dancers in this group at the time. That saying that people have about being a big fish in a little pond. Well, if you are at a 2-year women's college and you only go to 4 formal dances a year, of course you think you are doing very well, right? Then I got out into the world. When I got onto the air base at Scott Field, I started going out with some of the other people to these nightclubs, and I saw dancing I had never seen before. It was more sophisticated. Now, at that time, I didn't have any black friends. Well, we used other words then, but we'll say black is the right way to talk now. We didn't say anything bad. I mean, we just had polite terms, but those terms are not polite now. You don't want to take your language and put it back in the old way where people used to think. You want to bring your language up, even if you're talking about old times. Just because there was a way we talked in the past, we didn't know any better. But now that we know better, it's important to me to treat everyone respectfully. As I was saying, I didn't really know very many black people. But of course, as you start getting out in these cities and go to these nightclubs and things, you end up rubbing shoulders with all kinds of people, different people, and the influence of what they're doing on the music really changes. Also, you hear other kinds of music. I was not familiar with all kinds of music that was going on out in the world. I didn't really have access to it till I started working at Scott Airfield. And some of the airmen and the different staff and military people of various kinds, Jeep drivers, all of them. A lot of them had their own record collections, and one or two of them would have a record player. Of course, it was a 78 back in those days. They would have one in their quarters, or there were recreation halls and things, and people would bring their own records and have dance parties and so on. I became familiar with different kinds of music I didn't know a lot about. Yes, your question's right on the money there. Later on, when I was doing Boogie Woogie Baton at the small radio station that was over the nightclub in the Mill Creek Valley area, many of those records and that style of music, that's exactly where it came from.